Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining in. Today we are going to do Percy Jackson and the Titan's Curse, chapter 5 and 6. So, without further ado, let's get started. Chapter 5. I make an underwater phone call. I'd never seen Camp Half Blood in winter before, and the snow surprised me. See, the camp has the ultimate magic climate control. Nothing gets inside the borders unless the director, Mr. D, wants it to. I thought it would be warm and sunny, but instead the snow had been allowed to fall lightly. Frost covered the chariot track and the strawberry fields. The cabins were decorated with tiny flickering lights, like Christmas lights, except they seemed to be small balls of small fire, real fire. More lights glowed in the woods, and the weirdest of all, a fire flickered in the attic window of the big house where the oracle dwelt, imprisoned in an old mummified body. I wondered if the spirit of Delphi was roasting marshmallows up there or something. Whoa, Nico said as he climbed off the bus. Is that a climbing wall? Yeah, I said. Why is there lava pouring down it? Little extra challenge. Come on, I'll introduce you to Chiron. Zoe, have you met? I know Chiron. Zoe said stiffly. Tell him we will be in cabin 8. Hunters, follow me. I'll show you the way, Grover offered. We know the way. Oh, really? It's no trouble. It's easy to get lost here. If you don't, he tripped over a canoe and came up still talking, like my old daddy goat used to say. Come on. Zoe rolled her eyes, but I guess she figured there was no getting rid of Grover. The hunters shouldered their packs and their bows and headed off towards the cabins. As Bianca D'Angelo was leaving, she leaned over and whispered something in her brother's ear. She looked at him for an answer. Nico just scowled and turned away. Take care, sweethearts, Apollo called for after the hunters. He winked at me. Watch out for those prophecies. Percy, I'll see you soon. What do you mean? Instead of answering, he hopped back in the bus. Later, Thalia, and be good, he called. He gave her a wicked smile as if he knew something she didn't. Then he closed the door and revved the engine. I turned aside as the sun chariot took off in a blast of heat. When I looked back, the lake was steaming. A red Maserati soared over the woods, glowing brighter and climbing higher until it disappeared in a ray of sunlight. Nico was still looking grumpy. I wondered what his sister told. Who's Chiron? He asked. I don't have his figurine. Our activities director. He's, well, you'll see, I said. If those hunter girls don't like him, that's good enough for me. Let's go, Nico grumbled. The second thing that surprised me about camp was how empty it was. I mean, I knew most half bloods only trained during summer. Just the year rounders would be here. The ones who didn't have homes to go to or would get attacked by monsters too much if they left. But there didn't seem to be many of them either. I spotted Charles Beckendorf from the Hephaestus cabin stoking the forge outside the camp armory. The Stoll brothers, Travis and Connor from the Hermes cabin, were picking the lock on the camp store. A few kids from the Ares cabin were having a snowball fight with the wood nymphs at the edge of the forest. That was about it. Even my old rival from the Ares cabin, Clarice, didn't seem to be around. The big house was decorated with strings of red and yellow fireballs that warmed the porch but didn't seem to set anything alight. Inside, flames crackled in the hearth. The air smelled like hot chocolate. Mr. D, the camp director, and Chiron were playing a quiet game of cards in the parlor. Chiron's brown beard was shaggier for the winter. His curly hair had grown a little longer. He wasn't posing as a teacher this year. so I guess he could afford to be casual. He wore a fuzzy sweater with hoof print design on it, and he had a blanket on his lap that almost hid his wheelchair completely. He smiled when he saw us. Percy, Thalia, and this must be Nico D'Angelo. He and his sister are half bloods. Chiron breathed a sigh of relief. You succeeded then. Well, his smile melted. What's wrong? And where is Annabeth? Oh dear. Not another one lost, Mr. D said in a bored voice. I'd been trying not to pay attention to Mr. D, but he was kind of hard to ignore in his neon orange leopard skin warm up suit and his purple running shoes, like Mr. D had ever run in a day in his immortal life. A golden laurel wreath was tilted sideways on his curly black hair, which must have meant he'd won the last hand of the cards. What do you mean? Who else is lost? Thalia asked. Just then Grover trotted into the room grinning like crazy. He had black eye and red lines on his face that looked like a slap mark. The hunters are all moved in. Chiron frowned. The hunters, eh? I see we have much to talk about. He glanced at Nico. Grover, perhaps you should take our young friend to the den and show him our orientation film. But, oh right, yes sir. Orientation film. Is it G or PG? Because Bianca is kinda strict. It's PG, Grover said. Cool. Nico followed him out of the room. Now, Chiron said to Thalia and me, perhaps you two should sit down and tell us the whole story. When we were done, Chiron turned to Mr. D. We should launch a search for Annabeth immediately. I'll go, Thalia and I said at the same time. Certainly not, Mr. D sniffed. Thalia and I both started complaining, but Mr. D held up his hand. He had that purplish, angry fire in his eyes that usually meant something bad and godly was going to happen if we didn't shut up. From what you have told me, Mr. D said, we have broken even on this escapade. We have regrettably lost Annabeth, I snapped. She'd gone to camp since she was 7 and still Mr. D pretended not to know her name. Yes, and you procured a small, annoying boy to replace her. So I see no point risking further half-bloods on a ridiculous rescue. The possibility is very great that this Annie girl is dead. I wanted to strangle Mr. D. It wasn't fair Zeus had sent him here to dry out as a camp director for 100 years. It was meant to be a punishment for Mr. D's bad behavior on Olympus, but it ended up being a punishment for all of us. Annabeth may be alive, Chiron said, but I could tell he was having trouble sounding upbeat. He'd practically raised Annabeth all these years. She was a year-round camper before she'd given living with her father and stepmom a second try. She's very bright. If our enemies have her, she will try to play for time. She may even pretend to cooperate. That's right, Thalia said. Luke would want her alive. In which case, said Mr. D, I'm afraid she will have to be smart enough to escape on her own. I got up from the table. Percy? Chiron's tone was full of warning. In the back of my mind, I knew Mr. D was not somebody to mess with. Even if you were an impulsive ADHD kid like me, he wouldn't give you any slack. But I was so angry, I didn't care. You're glad to lose another camper, I said. You'd like it if we all disappeared. Mr. D stifled a yawn. You have a point? Yeah, I growled. Just because you were sent here as a punishment doesn't mean you have to be a lazy jerk. This is your civilization too. Maybe you could try helping out a little. For a second there was no sound except the crackle of the fire. The light reflected in Mr. D's eyes, giving him a sinister look. He opened his mouth to say something, probably a curse that would blast me to smithereens, when Nico burst into room followed by Grover. So cool, Nico yelled, holding his hands out to Chiron. You're a centaur. Chiron managed a nervous smile. Yes, Mr. D'Angelo, if you please. Though I prefer to stay in human form in this wheelchair for our first encounters. And whoa, you're the wine dude. He looked at Mr. D. No way. Mr. D turned his eyes away from me and gave Nico a look of loathing. The wine dude? Dionysus, right? Oh wow, I've got your figurine. My figurine in my game, Mythomagic, and a holofoil card too. And even though you've only got like 500 attack points and everybody thinks you're the lamest god card, I totally think your powers are sweet. Ah, Mr. D seemed truly perplexed, which probably saved my life. Well, that's gratifying. Percy, Chiron said quickly, you and Thalia go down to the cabins, inform the campus we'll be playing Capture the Flag tomorrow evening. Capture the flag? I asked. But we don't have enough. It is a tradition. A friendly match whenever the hunters visit, Chiron said. Yes, I bet it's real friendly, Thalia muttered. Chiron jerked his head towards Mr. D, who was still frowning as Nico talked about how many defense points all the gods had in his game. Run along now, Chiron told us. Oh, right. Come on, Percy, Thalia said. She hauled me out of the big house before Dionysus could remember that he wanted to kill me. You've already got Ares on your bad side, Thalia reminded me as we trudged towards the cabins. You need another immortal enemy? She was right. My first summer here as a camper, I'd got in a fight with Ares, and now he and all his children want to kill me. I didn't need to make Dionysus mad too. Sorry, I said. I couldn't help it. It's just so unfair. She stopped by the armory and looked out across the valley, towards the top of Half Blood Hill. A pine tree was still there, the golden fleece glittering in its lowest branch. The tree's magic still protected the borders of camp, but it no longer used Thalia's spirit for power. Percy, everything is unfair, Thalia muttered. Sometimes I wish. She didn't finish, but her tone was so sad I felt sorry for her. With her ragged black hair and her black punk clothes, an old wood overcoat wrapped around her, she looked like some kind of huge raven, completely out of place in the white landscape. We'll get Annabeth back, I promised. I just don't know how yet. First, I found out that Luke is lost. Now, Annabeth, she said. Don't think like that. Yeah, right. She straightened up. We'll find a way. You're right. My bad. You're right. We'll find a way. Over at the basketball court, a few of the hunters were shooting hoops. One of them was arguing with a guy from the Ares cabin. The Ares kid had his hand on his sword, and the hunter girl looked like she was going to exchange her basketball for a bow and arrow any second. That'll I'll break that up. You circulate around the cabins. Tell everybody about the capture the flag tomorrow. All right. You should be team captain. No. You've been at camp longer. You do it, she said. We can go captain or something. She looked about as comfortable with that as I felt, but she nodded. As she headed for the court, I said, Hey Thalia. Yeah? I'm sorry about what happened at Westover. I should have waited for you guys. It's okay, Purse. I probably would have done the same thing. She shifted from foot to foot, like she was trying to decide whether or not to say more. You know, you asked about my mom and I kinda snapped at you. It's just, I went back to find her after 7 years and I found out she died in Los Angeles. She she was a heavy drinker and apparently she was out driving late one night about 2 years ago and Thalia blinked hard. I'm sorry. Yeah, well, It's it's not like we were ever close. I ran away when I was 10. Best 2 years of my life were when I was running around with Luke and Annabeth. But still, that's why you had trouble with the sun van. She gave me a wary look. What do you mean? The way you stiffened up. You must have been thinking about your mom not wanting to get behind the wheel. I was sorry I'd said anything. Thalia's expression was dangerously close to Zeus's. The one time I'd seen him get angry, like any minute, her eyes would shoot a million volts. Yeah, she muttered. Yeah, that must have been it. She trudged off towards the court, where the airy scamper and the hunter were trying to kill each other with a sword and a basketball. The cabins were the weirdest collection of buildings you've ever seen. Zeus and Hera's big white columned buildings, cabin 1 and 2, stood in the middle with five gods' cabins on the left and five goddesses' cabins on the right. So they all made a U round the central green and barbecue hearth. I made the rounds, telling everybody about Capture the Flag. I woke up some Aries kid from his midday nap and he yelled at me to go away. When I asked him where Clarice he said, went on a quest for Chiron, top secret. Is she okay? Haven't heard from her in a month. She's been missing in action. Like your butt's gonna be if you don't get out of here. I decided to let him go back to sleep. Finally, I got to cabin 3, the cabin of Poseidon. It was a low grey building hewn from sea stone with shells and coral fossils imprinted on the rock. Inside it was just as empty as always, except for my bunk. A minotaur horn hung on the wall next to my pillow. I took Annabeth's baseball cap out of my backpack and set it on my nightstand. I'd give it to her when I found her, and I would find her. I took off my wristwatch and activated the shield. It creaked noisily as it spiraled out. Dr. Thorne's spikes had dented the bras in a dozen places. One gash kept the shield from opening all the way, so it looked like a pizza with two slices missing. The beautiful metal pictures that my brother had crafted were all banged up. And the picture of me and Annabeth fighting the Hydra, it looked like a meteor had made a crater in my head. I hung the shield on its hook next to the Minotaur horn, but it was painful to look at now. Maybe Beckendorf from Hephaestus' cabin could fix it up for me. He was the best armor smith in the camp. I'd ask him at dinner. I was staring at the shield when I noticed a strange sound, water gurgling, and I realized there was something new in the room. At the back of the cabin was a big basin of grey sea rock with a sprout like the head of a fish carved in a stone. Out of its mouth burst a stream of water, a saltwater spring that trickled into the pool. The water must have been hot because it sent mist into the cold winter air like sauna. It made the room feel warm and summery, fresh with the smell of sea. I stepped up to the pool. There was no note attached to anything, but I knew it could only be a gift from Poseidon. I looked into water and said, Thanks, Dad. A surface rippled. At the bottom of the pool, coins shimmered, a dozen or so gold drachma. I realized what the fountain was for. It was a reminder to keep in touch with my family. I opened the nearest window, and the wintry sunlight made a rainbow in the mist. Then I fished a coin out of the hot water. Iris, O goddess of rainbow, accept my offering. I tossed a coin into the mist and it disappeared. Then I realized I didn't know who to contact first. My mom? That would have been the good son thing to do, but she wouldn't be worried about me yet. She was used to me disappearing for days or weeks at a time. My father, it had been way too long, almost 2 years, since I'd actually talked to him. But could you even send an Iris message to a god? I'd never tried. Would it make them mad, like a sales call or something? I hesitated, then I made up my mind. Show me Tyson. At the forges of the Cyclops, I requested. The mist shimmered and the image of my half brother appeared. He was surrounded by fire, which would have been a problem if you weren't a Cyclops. He was bent over an anvil, hammering a red hot sword blade. Sparks flew and flames swirled around his body. There was a marble framed window behind him, and it looked out into dark blue water, the bottom of the ocean. Tyson, I yelled. He didn't hear me first because of the hammering and the roaring of the flames. Tyson! He turned. His one enormous eye widened. His face broke into a crooked yellow grin. Percy. He dropped the sword blade and ran at me, trying to give me a hug. The vision blurred and I instinctively lurched back. Tyson, it's an Iris message. I'm not really here. Oh, he came back into view looking embarrassed. Oh, I knew that. Yes. How are you? How's the job? Love the job. His eyes lit up. He picked up the hot sword blade with his bare hands. I made this. That's really cool. I wrote my name on it, right there. Awesome. Listen, do you talk to Dad much? Tyson's smile faded. Not much. Daddy is busy. He is worried about the war. What do you mean? Tyson sighed. He stuck the sword blade out of the window, where it made a cloud of boiling bubbles. When Tyson brought it back, the metal was cool. Old sea spirits making trouble. Aegeos, Oceanius, those guys. I sort of knew what he was talking about. He meant the immortals who ruled the oceans back in the days of the Titans, before Olympians took over. The fact that they were back now, with the Titan Lord Kronos and his allies gaining strength, was not good. Is there anything I can do? I asked. Tyson shook his head. We are arming the mermaids. They need 1,000 more swords by tomorrow. He looked at his sword blade and sighed. Old spirits are protecting the bad boat. The Princess Andromeda, I said. Luke's boat? Yes, they make it hard to find, protect it from Daddy's storms. Otherwise, he would smash it. Smashing it would be good. Tyson perked up as if he had just another thought. Annabeth, is she there? Oh well. My heart felt like a bowling ball. Tyson thought Annabeth was just about the coolest thing since peanut butter, and he seriously loved peanut butter. I didn't have the heart to tell him she was missing. He'd start crying so bad he'd probably put out his fires. Well, no, she's not here right now. Tell her hello. Hello to Annabeth. He beamed. Okay. I fought back a lump in my throat. I'll do that. And Percy, don't worry about the bad boat. It is going away. What do you mean? Panama Canal. Very far away. I frowned. Why would Luke take his demon infested cruise ship all the way down there? The last time we'd seen him, he'd been cruising along the east coast, recruiting half bloods and training his monstrous army. All right, I said, not feeling reassured. That's good, I guess. In the forges, a deep voice bellowed something I couldn't make out. Tyson flinched. Got to get back to work. Boss will get mad. Good luck, brother. Okay, tell Dad. But before I could finish, the vision shimmered and faded. I was alone again in my cabin, feeling even lonelier than before. I was I was pretty miserable at dinner that night. I mean, the food was excellent as usual. You can't go wrong with barbecue, pizza, and never empty soda goblets. The torches and braziers kept the outdoor pavilion warm. But we all had to sit with our cabin mates, which meant I was alone at Poseidon's table. Thalia sat alone at the Zeus table, but we couldn't sit together. Camp rules. At least the Hephaestus, Ares, and Hermes cabin had a few people each. Nico sat with the Stoll brothers since new campers always got stuck in the Hermes cabin if their Olympian parent was unknown. The Stoll brothers seemed to be trying to convince Nico that poker was much better game than Mytho Magic. I hope Nico didn't have any money to lose. The only table that really seemed to be having a good time was the Artemis table. The hunters drank and ate and laughed like one big happy family. Zoe sat at the head of the table like she was the mama. She didn't laugh as much as the others, but she did smile from time to time. Her silver lieutenant's band glittered in the dark braids of her hair. I thought she looked a lot nicer when she smiled. Bianca D'Angelo seemed to be having a great time. She was trying to learn how to arm wrestle from Big Girl, who had picked a fight with the Aries kid on the basketball court. The bigger girl was beating her every time, but Bianca didn't seem to mind. When we'd finished eating, Chiron made the customary toast to the gods and formally welcomed the hunters of Artemis. The clapping was pretty half hearted. When he announced the Goodwill capture the flag game for tomorrow night, which got much better reception. Afterwards, we all trailed back to our cabins for an early winter lights out. I was exhausted, which meant I fell asleep easily. That was the good part. The bad part was I had a nightmare, and even by my standards, it was a whopper. Annabeth was on a dark hill shrouded in fog. It almost seemed like underworld because I immediately felt claustrophobic and couldn't see the sky above. Just a heavy, close heavy darkness as if I were in a cave. Annabeth struggled up the hill. Old broken Greek columns of black marble were scattered around as though something had blasted a huge building to ruins. Thorn! Annabeth cried. Where are you? Why did you bring me here? She scrambled over a section of broken wall and came to the crest of the hill. She gasped. There was Luke, and he was in pain. He was crumbled on the rocky ground, trying to rise. The blackness seemed to be thicker around him, fog swirling hungrily. His clothes were in tatters, and his face was scratched and drenched with sweat. Annabeth, help me, please, he called. She ran forward. I am so not trusting this. I tried to cry out, he's a traitor, don't trust him. But my voice didn't work in the dream. Annabeth had tears in her eyes. She reached down like she wanted to touch Luke's face, but at the last second she hesitated. What happened? She asked. They left me here. Please, it's killing me, Luke groaned. I couldn't see what was wrong with him. He seemed to be struggling against some invisible curse, as though the fog was squeezing him to death. Why should I trust you? Asked. Her voice was filled with hurt. You shouldn't. I've been terrible to you. But if you don't help me, I'll die. Let him die. I wanted to scream. Luke had tried to kill us in cold blood too many times. He didn't deserve anything from Annabeth. Then the darkness above Luke began to crumble like a cavern roof in an earthquake. Huge chunks of black rock began to fall. Annabeth rushed in just as a crack appeared and the whole ceiling dropped. She held it somehow, tons of rocks. She kept it from collapsing on her head and Luke just with her own strength. It was impossible. She shouldn't have been able to do that. Luke rolled free, gasping. Thanks, he managed. Help me hold it, Annabeth groaned. Luke caught his breath. His face was covered in grime and sweat. He rose unsteadily. I knew I could count on you. He began to walk away as the trembling blackness threatened to crush Annabeth. Help me, she pleaded. Oh, don't worry. Your help is on the way. It's all part of the plan. In the meantime, try not to die, Luke said. The ceiling of darkness began to crumble more, pushing Annabeth against the ground. I sat bolt upright in bed, clawing at sheets. There was no sound in my cabin except the gurgle of sweet water. Spring. The clock on my nightshade read just after midnight. Only a dream, but I was sure of two things. Annabeth was in danger and Luke was responsible. Chapter 6. An old dead friend comes to visit. visit. The next morning after breakfast, I told Grover about my dream. We sat in the meadow watching satyrs chase the wood nymphs through the snow. The nymphs had promised to kiss the satyrs if they got caught, but they hardly ever did. Usually, the nymph would let the satyr get up in a full head of steam. Then she'd turn into a snow covered tree, and the poor satyr would slam into it head first and get a pile of snow dumped on him. When I told Grover about my nightmare, he started twirling his finger on his shaggy leg fur. A cave ceiling collapsed on her, I asked. Yeah, what the heck does that mean? I don't know, but after what Zoe dreamed. Grover shook his head. Whoa, what do you mean? Zoe had a dream like that? I I don't know exactly. About 3 in the morning she came to the big house and demanded to talk to Chiron. She looked really panicked. Wait, how do you know this? I was sort of camped outside the Artemis cabin. Grover blushed. What for? Just to be, near them. You're a stalker with hooves. I am not. Anyway, I followed her to the big house and hid in a bush and watched the whole thing. She got really upset when Argus wouldn't let her in. It was kind of a dangerous scene. I tried to imagine that. Argus was the head of the security of camp, a big blond dude with eyes all over his body. He rarely showed himself unless something serious was going on. I wouldn't want to place bets on a fight between him and Zoe Nightshade. What did she say? Grover grimaced. Well, she starts talking really old fashioned when she gets upset, so it was kind of hard to understand. But something about Artemis being in trouble and needing the hunters. And then she called Argus a boil brained lout. I think that's a bad thing. And he called her. Whoa, wait. How could Artemis be in trouble? I. Well, finally, Chiron came out in his pajamas and his horse tail in curls. And he wears curlers in his tail? Grover covered his mouth. Sorry, go on. Well, Zoe said she needed permission to leave camp immediately. Chiron refused. He reminded Zoe that the hunters were supposed to stay here until they received orders from Artemis. And she said, Grover gulped. She said, how are we to get orders from Artemis if Artemis is lost? What do you mean lost? Like she needs directions? No, I think she meant gone, taken, kidnapped. Kidnapped? I tried to get my mind around that idea. How would you kidnap an immortal goddess? Is that even possible? Well, yeah, I mean, it happened to Persephone. But she was like the goddess of flowers. Grover looked offended. Springtime. Whatever. Artemis is a lot powerful than that. Who could kidnap her and why? Grover shook his head miserably. I don't know. Kronos? He can't be the powerful already, can he? The last time we'd seen Kronos, he'd been in tiny pieces. Well, we hadn't actually seen him. Thousands of years ago, after the big Titan God War, the gods had sliced him to bits with his own teeth and scattered his remains in Tartarus, which is like the gods' bottomless recycling bin for their enemies. 2 summers ago, Kronos had tricked us to the very edge of the pit and almost pulled us in. Then last summer, on board Luke's demon cruise ship, we'd seen a golden coffin where Luke claimed he was summoning the Titan Lord out of the abyss, bit by bit. Every time someone new joined their cause, Kronos could influence people with dreams and trick them. But I didn't see how he could physically overcome Artemis if he were still like a pile of evil bark mulch. I don't know, Grover said. I think somebody would know if Kronos had reformed. The gods would be more nervous. But still, it's weird. You having a nightmare the same night as Zoe? It's almost like they are connected, I said. Over in Frozen Meadow, a satyr skidded on his hooves as he chased after a redhead tree nymph. She giggled and held out her arms as he ran towards her. Pop, she turned into a Scotch pine and he kissed the trunk at top speed. Ah, love, Grover said dreamily. I thought about Zoe's nightmare, which she'd had only a few hours after mine. I've got to talk to Zoe, I said. Before you do, Grover took something out of his coat pocket. It was a three-fold display like a travel brochure. You remember what you said about how it was weird that hunters just happened to show up at Westover Hall? I think they might have been scouting us. Scouting us? What do you mean? He gave me the brochure. It was the Hunters of Artemis. In front read, "A wise choice for your future." Inside were pictures of young maidens doing hunter stuff, chasing monsters, shooting bows. There were captions like "health benefits, immortality, and what it means for you," and "a boy free tomorrow." I found that in Annabeth's backpack. Grover said. I, st- I stared at him. I don't understand. Well, it seems to me maybe Annabeth was thinking about joining. I'd like to say I took the news well. He didn't. The truth was, I wanted to strangle the hunters of Artemis, an eternal maiden at a time. The rest of the day, I tried to keep busy, but I was worried sick about Annabeth. I went to a javelin throwing class, but the airy scamper in the charge yelled at me after I got distracted and threw the javelin at the target before he got out of the way. I apologized for the hole in his trouser, but he still sent me packing. I visited the Pegasus stables, but Silena, bodyguard from Aphrodite cabin, was having an argument with one of the hunters, and I decided I'd better not get involved. After that, I sat in the empty chariot stands and sulked. Down at the archery fields, Chiron was conducting target practice. I knew he'd be the best person to talk to. Maybe he could give me some advice, but something held me back. I had a feeling Chiron would try to protect me like he always did. He might not tell me everything he knew. I looked in the other direction at the top of the Half Blood Hill, Mr. D and Argus feeding the baby dragon that guarded the golden fleece. Then it occurred to me, no one would be in Big House. There was someone else, something else. I could ask for guidance. My blood was humming in my ears as I ran into the house and took the stairs. I'd only done this once before, and I still had nightmares about it. I opened the trapdoor and stepped into the attic. The room was dark and dusty and cluttered with junk just like I remembered. There were shields with monster bites of them, swords bent in the shapes of demon heads, and a bunch of taxidermy like a stuffed harpy and a bright orange python. Over the window, sitting on a three-legged stool, was a shriveled up mummy of an old lady in a tie-dyed hippie dress, the oracle. I made myself walk towards her. I waited for the green mist to billow from the mummy's mouth like it did before, but nothing happened. Hi, what's up? I said. I winced at how stupid that sounded. Not much could be up when you're dead and stuck in the attic. But I knew the spirit of Oracle was in there somewhere. I could feel a cold presence in the room like a coiled sleeping snake. I have a question, I said, a little louder. I need to know about Annabeth. How can I save her? No answer. The sun slanted through the dirty attic window, making the dust motes dance in the air. I waited longer, then I got angry. I was being stonewalled by a corpse. All right, I said. Fine, I'll figure it out myself. I turned and bumped into a big table full of souvenirs. It seemed more cluttered than the last time I was here. Heroes stored all kinds of stuff in the attic, quest trophies they no longer wanted to keep in their cabins, or stuff that held painful memories. I knew Luke had stored a dragon claw somewhere up here, the one that had scarred his face. There was a broken sword hilt label, "This broke and Leroy got killed 1999." Then I noticed a pink silk scarf with a label attached to it. I picked up the tag and tried to read it. Scarf of the goddess Aphrodite, recovered in Waterland, Denver, Co. by Percy Jackson and Annabeth Chase. I stared at the scarf. I'd totally forgotten about it. 2 years ago, Annabeth had ripped this scarf out of my hand and said something like, "Oh no, no love magic for you." It is. I'd assumed she'd thrown it away, and yet here it wa- it was. She'd kept it all this time, and why had she stashed it in the attic? I turned to the mummy. She hadn't moved, but the shadows across her face made it look like she was smiling gruesomely. I dropped the scarf and tried not to run towards the exit. That night after dinner, I was seriously ready to beat the hunters at Capture the Flag. It was going to be a small game, only 13 hunters, including Bianca D'Angelo and about the same number of campers. So United looked pretty upset. She kept glancing resentfully at Chiron, like she couldn't believe he was making her do this. The other hunters didn't look too happy either. Unlike last night, they weren't laughing or joking around. They just huddled together in the dining pavilion, whispering nervously to each other as they strapped on their armor. Some of them even looked like they'd been crying. I guess Zoe had told them about her nightmare. On our team, we had Beckendorf and two other Hephaestus guys, a few from the Ares cabin, though it still seemed strange that Clarice wasn't around. The Stoll brothers and Nico from Romi's cabin, and a few Aphrodite kids. It was weird that Aphrodite cabin wanted to play. Usually they sat on the sidelines, chattered, and checked reflection in the river and stuff. But when they heard we were fighting the hunters, they were raring to go. "I'll show them. Love is worthless," Selena Beauregard grumbled as she strapped on her armor. "I'll pulverize them." That left Thalia and me. "I'll take the offense," Thalia volunteered. "You take defense." Oh, I hesitated because I had been about to say the exact same thing, only reverse. "Don't you think that your shield and all you'd be a better defense?" Thalia already had Aegis on her arm. Even her own teammates were giving her a wide berth, trying not to cower before the bronze head of Medusa. Well, I was thinking it would make much better offense. Besides, you've had more practice at defense. I wasn't sure if she was teasing me. I'd had some pretty bad experiences with defense on the Capture the Flag. My first year, my first year, Annabeth had put me out as a kind of bait, and I'd almost been gored to death with spears and killed by a hellhound. "Yeah, no problem," I lied. "Cool." Thalia turned to help some of the Aphrodite kids who were having trouble sitting up their armor without breaking their nails. Nico D'Angelo ran up to me with a big grin on his face. "Percy, this is awesome." His blue feathered bronze helmet was falling in his eyes, and his breastplate was about 6 sizes too big. I wondered if there was any way I'd look that ridiculous when I'd first arrived. Unfortunately, I probably had. Nico lifted his sword with effort. "Do we get to kill the other teammate?" "Well, no. But the hunters are immortal, right? That's only if they don't fall in battle. Besides, it would be awesome if we just resurrected as soon as we were killed, so we could keep fighting." And "Nico, this is serious. Real swords. These can hurt." He stared at me, a little disappointed, and I realized that I just sounded like my mother. Whoa, not a good sign. I patted Nico on the back shoulder. "Hey, it's cool. Just follow the team. Stay out of Zoe's way. We'll have a blast." Current's hoof thundered on the pavilion floor. "Heroes," he called. "You know the rules. The river is boundary line. Blue team Camp Half-Blood shall take the westwards. Hunters of Artemis, red team, shall take the eastwards. I will serve as referee and battlefield medic. No intentional maiming, please. All magic items are allowed to your positions." "Sweet." Nico whispered next to me. "What kind of magic items? Do I get one?" I was about to break it to him that he didn't. Even Thalia said blue team. When Thalia said, "Blue team, follow me," they cheered and followed. I had to run to catch up and tripped over somebody's shield, so I didn't look much like a co-captain, more like an idiot. We set our flag at top of Zeus's fist. It's this cluster of boulders in the middle of the West Woods that, if you look at it just right way, looks like a huge fist sticking out of the ground. If you look at it from the other side, it looked like a pile of enormous deer droppings, but Chiron wouldn't let us call the place poop pile, especially after it had been named for Zeus, who doesn't have much of a sense of humor. Anyway, it was a good place to set the flag. The top boulder was 6 meters tall, really had to climb to the flags, was clearly visible like the rules said it had been. and it didn't matter what, the guards weren't allowed to stand within 10 meters of it. I set Nico on guard duty with Beckendorf and Stoll brothers, figuring he'd be safely out of the way. We'll send out a decoy to the left, Thalia said. Selina, lead that. You lead that. Got it. Take Laurel and Jason. They're good runners. Make a wide arc around hunters. Attract as many as you can. I'll take the main raiding party around the right and catch them by surprise. Everybody nodded. It sounded good, and Thalia said it with such confidence you couldn't help but believe it would work. Thalia looked at me. Anything to add, Percy? Yeah, keep sharp on defense. We've got 4 guards, 2 scouts. That's not much for a big forest. I'll be rowing. Yell if you need help. And don't leave your post, Thalia said. Unless you've seen a golden opportunity, I added. Thalia scowled. Just don't leave your post. Right, unless Percy. She touched my arm and shocked me. I mean, everybody can give static shocks in the winter, but when Thalia does it, it hurts. I guess it's because her dad is a god of lightning. She'd been known frying people's eyebrows off. Sorry, Thalia said, though she didn't mean particularly sorry. Now is everybody clear? Everybody nodded. We broke into our smaller groups. The horn sounded. The game began. Selena's group disappeared into the forest. Thalia's group gave a few seconds and darted off. We waited, something happened. Climbed Zeus' fist and had a good view for the forest. Remembered how the hunters had stormed out when they fought the manticore, and I was prepared for something. One huge charge that could overwhelm us. Nothing happened. I caught the glimpse of Selena and 2 scouts. They clearing followed hunters, leading them into the deep woods. Thalia, the plan seemed to be working. Then I spotted hunters climbing. Must have spotted Thalia. What's happening? Nico demanded, trying to climb next to me. It was racing. Thalia would never get through, but the hunters were divided. Looked at Beckendorf. Can you guys hold the fort? Of course, Beckendorf snorted. I'm going in. The Stoll brothers and Nico cheered as I raced towards the boundary line. I was running at top speed and I felt great. I leaped. You could see the silver flag up. The guard turned at the last minute. It was Bianca D'Angelo. Her eyes widened as I slammed into her. She went sprawling in the snow. Sorry, I yelled, ripping the silk flag from the tree and took off. Zip. Silvery cord raised across my ankles and fastened to the tree next to me. Tripwire fired from a bow before I could. Percy, Thalia, what are you doing? Before she could reach me, an arrow exploded at her feet. A cloud of yellow smoke billowed. Not fair, Thalia said. Far clouds are unsportsmanlike. Got up and started running again. Only a few more meters. River, I had the game. Arrows whizzed past my ear. I heard yelling from outside. Beckendorf and Nico were running towards me. I thought they were coming to welcome me back, but then saw chasing someone. Tread racing towards me like a cheetah, dodging campers with no trouble. She had our flag on her hands. No, and I yelled. It's a meter from the water, so we bolted across. Hunters cheered. Coverage he had. The hunters win, Chiron announced without pleasure. Then he muttered, for the 56th time in a row. Perseus Jackson, Thalia yelled, storming towards me. She smelled like rotten eggs. She was so mad with blue sparks flickered in her armor. Everybody cringed and backed because of Aegis. It took all my willpower not to cower. What in the name of the gods were you thinking? She bellowed, balled my fists. I got the flag, Thalia. Shook it in her face. I saw a chance and I took it. I was at her base, but the flag was gone. If you hadn't butted in, we would have won. You had too many on you. Oh, it's my fault. I didn't say, Thalia pushed and shock went through my body and blew me backwards 3 meters. A couple of hunters stifled. I didn't mean to. Sorry, Thalia said. Anger rose in my ears. Wave erupted from the river, blasting Thalia's face, dousing her. Yeah, I didn't mean to either. I stood up. Thalia was breathing heavily. Enough, Chiron allowed her spear. You want some seaweed brain? Somehow it was okay when Annabeth called me that. At least I'd got used to it. Thalia was not cool. Bring it on. Pinecone face. I raised Riptide, but before I could even defend myself, Thalia yelled and a blast lightning came down from the sky, hit her spear like a lightning rod and slammed into my chest. I sat down hard. There was burning smell. I had feeling it was my clothes. Thalia, that was enough. Chiron said. I got to my feet, willed the entire river to rise. It swirled up, hundreds of gallons of water in massive icy tunnel. Chiron pleaded. Percy, I was about to hurl it, Thalia, when I saw something in the wood. I lost my anger and my concentration all at once. The water splashed back,